Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Shia Nafti. I'm a Google authorized trainer, and in the next few minutes I'm going to take you through the process of deploying an application, a Node.js Hello World application, onto Cloud Run, the managed version of Cloud Run, fully managed by Google, and also a self-managed version. In other words, we're going to deploy the same application in a Kubernetes cluster, which we're going to create and which will be managed by us. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we will do is make sure we're working in the right project. So we're going to set the project to the current project's ID. Having done that, we'll then carry on and make sure we have access to the relevant services. So these are the Kubernetes service. We will create a container image, which will push into container registry. So we need access to that service. We obviously need access to Cloud Run itself. We need a way of building the image. So we're going to enable the Cloud Build API. So let's go ahead and enable these APIs. With the APIs enabled, let's move on to the next step, which is step number 2. This is where we're going to build the image. Now, before we kick off this process, I would like to show you what the application looks like. Here we have a Docker file. This is the Docker file we're going to use to build the image. You can see that it makes reference to JSON files. Additionally, we also have the application code itself, which is the index.js, which is a JavaScript. Let's go back to our console. So now we're going to go ahead and build the Docker image. To do that, we're going to change directories to the location of the Docker file and the application code. Having changed into that directory, we're going to run the gcloud build submit command to build the image. And this builds the image and pushes the image into container registry. So let's go ahead and do that. The image was successfully built and pushed to the registry, so we can move on to the next step. The next step is step number 3, which is where we're going to deploy this image from container registry directly into a managed instance of Cloud Run. To get this image into Cloud Run running, all we need to do is use the gcloud run deploy command, specify a name for the application that will be deployed into Cloud Run. The service we're going to use is the managed service. That's why we're specifying the platform value as managed. The region is US Central 1. Given that this is a demo, we're going to allow unauthenticated users to access the application. And we obviously need to specify the location of the image, and that's specified using the ---- image option. Let's go ahead and run this. The service appears to have been successfully deployed, and we have here the endpoint to the service. So let's go ahead and click this. And here you see Hello World. That's the application running. Before we move on, I would like to also explore this on the console. So here we'll go to the compute section and select Cloud Run. I'm going to hide the info panel. Let's click on the service. Here we can see the dashboard. Under revisions, we can see here the revisions that are available. There's one revision. We can perform actions such as deleting the service. Under logs, we can access log files for the service. And the details view provides us with information on the region, the endpoint, that's the URL to the service, as well as some additional information. We can also view the YAML file for the service, and permissions. I can also click on the URL here to access the application. And there we go, hello world. This concludes the demo for the managed service for Cloud Run. Let's have a look at the unmanaged service where we're going to do exactly the same thing, but the target platform will be a Kubernetes cluster, which we're going to create and manage. The next step, step number 4, is where we're going to create the Kubernetes cluster. I would like to point out the add-ons. There are a number of add-ons that we're specifying that are required: horizontal pod autoscaling, HTTP load balancing, Istio, and Cloud Run. The machine type is N1 standard 4. We're requesting the latest version, the latest supported version of Kubernetes. The zone is US Central 1A, and we're enabling stack driver monitoring. So let's go ahead and create this cluster. Okay, the cluster appears to have been created successfully. Here we have the name of the cluster. The location is US Central 1A. We have here the version of the cluster. That's the master as well as the node. We have an endpoint for the API server and a machine type. So everything looks good. 3 nodes, everything appears to be running. In the next step, we're going to configure networking to enable pods and services within the cluster to be able to communicate with each other. We're going to set the range of IP addresses that will be allocated to services to the service underscore IP underscore range environment variable. Having done this, we will get the current network configuration and pipe the output of that configuration into a YAML file. This is the YAML file. And if I scroll down, you can see here we have a value, istio.sidecar.include outbound IP ranges, and it's set to star. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure the range of IP addresses to be limited to the range of IP addresses that will be allocated to pods and services, right? So this is going to make the cluster a lot more secure. Let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to use the set command in order to replace the line Istio sidecar include outbound IP addresses star with the range of IP addresses that we previously saved in those environment variables. Let's have a look at this, and you can see the modified configuration here. Now, with this configuration file modified, in the next step, we're going to apply it to the cluster. And in so doing, we will essentially be modifying the network configuration. The final thing we're going to do is label the namespace to ensure that any service that's deployed into the default namespace has the Istio sidecar automatically injected into the pod. And now we have a cluster that's fully configured for Cloud Run with networking set up properly and with the default namespace labeled for automatic sidecar injection. So now we're ready to deploy our application into the cluster. So let's go ahead and do that. To deploy the application, we're going to start off by retrieving credentials to the cluster. With the credentials retrieved, we're now in a position to deploy the application, the container-based application in container registry. You can see here we're running the gcloud run deploy command, specifying the name of the service. The service will be deployed as hello world node.js. We're specifying the location for the image. That's a Docker container that will be deployed. The cluster is hello world -node.js. That's the name of the cluster where this service will be deployed. The location of the cluster is US Central 1A, and the platform is GKE. So this is a managed Kubernetes cluster. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so everything appears to have been successfully executed. Let's take a look at the console before we move on. I would like to have a look at the cluster and make sure everything is okay. Go to clusters. Let's select workloads. We can see here all of the workloads. Let's filter this by namespace. So that's the default namespace. And here we have the Node.js, right? It's a deployment and it's all green. So that appears to be working just fine. We also have Istio deployments within the Istio system namespace, as well as jobs also in the GKE system namespace. And at the bottom, we have a number of Knative serving components. These are all part of Cloud Run. Let's have a look at services and ingress. And once more, everything looks green, right? So we have here some services for the Hello World Node.js application. So everything looks okay. Nothing to worry about. Let's move on to the next step. So in step number 6, we're going to invoke this service. Before doing that, let's get the credentials for the cluster, because we'll have to set the IP address of the ingress. Now we're retrieving the ingress gateway IP. You can see here the value of the external IP is 34.68.142.163. Let's set that value as an environment variable. And let's invoke the endpoint using a curl request. It took a few seconds for the response to be returned, and that's because Cloud Run is serverless. So the first time we make the request, the service isn't actually running, and it needs to be initialized, which takes a few seconds. Here we have Hello World. This confirms that the service is indeed running, and the expected value was returned successfully. Thanks for watching this video and have a nice day.